This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Can I welcome everyone to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. This morning we will be holding a question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Assembly Member Lord Bailey and Assembly Member Moella.
Thank you, Lauren. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Thank you. Can we confirm the minutes of the meetings held on the 23rd of October 2024 and signed by me as correct records? Yep. Can we note the ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee? Thank you. We now move on to the question and answer session, and I'd like to welcome our guest, Kaya Comer-Schwartz, Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. Welcome. This is your first proper meeting with us, so we're very pleased to see you. First question, actually, and it's not around our subjects here. Do you know when the Police and Crime Plan will be actually published?
We're working, I've seen 2 drafts of it now. We're working, so we're very close to being going out to consultation. We know that there's going to be an 8-week consultation period at least, and we want to make sure that, picking up on the points that the committee made last time, we do that inclusively as possible with children and young people and other equality groups that we want to make sure we hear the voices of. So we're very clear on both an engagement plan and a draft plan. So my hope would be definitely that we would publish that. I want to not do it so it goes over the Christmas holiday, so we get as much engagement time as possible, so early New Year, I think.
Not even before Christmas?
Well, we could start it, but then the consultation period, the 8 weeks.
When will we see the draft of it?
Oh, okay, yeah, no, we'll see the draft. You can see the draft soon, definitely. It's in its final throes, so...
Yeah, soon is great. Do we have a date?
No, not a specific date, but I'm definitely committed to the committee going through it with me, so...
Well, of course.
Yeah.
There's no question. We want to go through it with you. But we do have to schedule things, and we were hoping to go through that at the beginning of December. We've just changed our plans, but I sincerely hope we see it this side of Christmas.
Okay, I'll get an update.
It's our Christmas reading, Kaya. Okay, so thank you for that. The only other thing, you will note you are on your own. We would much prefer that you had a police officer of some description here, as we always had before. This is completely cross-party. I don't expect the commissioner to come every time. None of us do. But we have a deputy commissioner. We have assistant commissioners. We have commanders. We have other chief officers that could come and assist if there is something that we want to know on an operation level, that they could come and assist. And they always used to, but it's been, in, I think, the last year or so, just over a year, that we haven't. So will you use your powers to try and persuade somebody from the senior officers level to come with you to these question and answer sessions so that they can put their point of view from their side of things? It would be helpful.
I'll definitely feed that back. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, they've had it they need it fed back really forcefully, because nothing we say they're paying any attention to. So be very grateful if you did that, Kaya, and it would help you, I feel sure. Right, we're going to start on child protection and the Met's children's strategy. I'm guessing you know that that's what we're going to be asking you on first.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay. So how satisfied are you with the Met's implementation of the recommendations made by HMI in its review of the sexual and criminal exploitation of children published in February 2024? And has it done well, and where do you believe the Met should have made better progress?
I think, obviously, the HMICFRS's report was quite strident in its recommendations, and it really puts the child first approach and its need in full force. And I've been really exceptionally proud of how this has been taken up through the child strategy and the work that's been done on child first approach. I think it's really important to lay out for the committee, I'm sure you already know, but I think it's important to go over the key tenets of the report to be child first. All work should be child focused, developmentally informed. Adults' duties of child safeguarding should be prioritised in all situations. Building a pro-social identity, promoting children's strengths and capacities. All work should be constructive and future-focused. Collaborating with children, engaging children and involving them to solve problems both in policy and in each encounter, and in diverting from stigma, using prevention, diversion and intervention only where necessary. So we know, obviously, why through safeguarding these tenets are so important. And we know the risks around adultification of children in certain circumstances. So we need to make sure we're all doing all we can to view children as children. I'm deeply committed to the new children's strategy. I want both the Met and MOPAC to be a child-first organisation. I think it's extremely important. I know that the child strategy was published in September 2024, and following consultation with MOPAC and the London Policing Board and other key partners, the strategy outlines the steps the MPS will take to introduce a child-first policy into the MPS. This means officers in all encounters will see children as children first, and the child-first approach recognises that children are different to adults and they have different needs and vulnerabilities and need to be treated as such.
Yeah. I hope you're not going to read all the answers to the questions. We're looking for a flavour of your feeling. I mean, you said you're quite pleased and you've given the written report of why you're pleased. I'm horrified that the Inspectorate in 2016, 2018, 2021 have had to make these sort of reports. It's really very alarming, do you not think?
Yes, I do. I fully do. I fully agree with you there, Susan. It is really alarming, and it shows that this work is extremely necessary. And on a personal approach, I think I am fully dedicated to making sure the Met and MOPAC and all our partners take a child-first approach. It's so important.
It really is. And every 2 years, the HMI are finding the... and for anybody watching that the HMI is His Majesty's Inspectorate. I only hope that in 2 years' time they don't come back and give another bad report, because it's not really good enough. So what action then are you taking, or is MOPAC taking, to ensure that it is embedded in the culture, in the Met's culture?
Well, obviously, MOPAC is ensuring through its oversight and scrutiny functions that we are, as well as making sure that MOPAC itself is taking a child-first approach.
Yeah, well, they clearly haven't been, because every 2 years something's been going wrong. So are you asking them to do something different to what they've done before, so we're not in this 2-year, re-look at it and it's still getting a bad HMI report?
Well, I think that's why the child strategy has been so important, so that, the Met and MOPAC can work collaboratively, joint up and aligned under the strategy to make sure that we have a strategy that we're held to account on, and so that doesn't happen, and that MOPAC continues to have clear oversight of that. And as I said, it's something I'm deeply passionate about, so I'll make sure that we are making progress against it. Okay.
And the Met has actually finalised the Children's Strategy Implementation Plan, has it?
No, I don't think so, not as yet.
No, I don't think so either. Any idea when that will be finalised?
I'll go back and make sure you have a clear date for that.
Okay, and when it will be published, be very grateful. Assemblymember Garbett, were you coming in behind this?
I think the next one after, yeah. I can come in. I can come in now.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you and morning. So my concerns kind of stem from what the chair was kind of describing, that this is it seems to be an ongoing, deep-rooted issues, and I was quite alarmed with some of the findings. My question's about how the kind of child first position statement and the child first policy is being considered in some of the way the Met are making decisions. Things like, I know there's a big review happening around police in schools, so I'm just wondering how this statement and how MOPAC kind of makes sure that any kind of developments kind of really consider this statement and policy, because that's an area where police officers have a lot of contact with children. The number of police officers in schools have doubled in the last kind of 10 years, and it seems without any kind of scrutiny. So I just wondered how MOPAC are taking on this child first position to really scrutinise that type of approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if I may, Assemblymember Garbett, I think a really good way of illustrating it is not on education itself, but actually as an example, the work that MPS and MOPAC have done in working with the London boroughs of Haringey and Enfield, running pilots on the Child First Custody and Training research is a really good illustration of work. They want to make sure that they're getting the best outcomes for children, decreasing the number of children detained in custody and the time children spend in custody and the number of children charged. So they have very clear outcomes on what they want to achieve. They're piloting ways of getting there, backed up by training, and making sure that they're doing that in a way that's piloting first, getting that data, reassuring themselves of that through the support with MOPAC. And hopefully it's illustrations like that that will make sure that we can embed those kinds of approaches across the Met.
Thank you. That's a really helpful illustration. I guess that speaks to when children come in contact with the police in a kind of reactive sense. And I guess the ones that I'm concerned about is when the police are making a proactive decision to spend, to be in contact with children within the, my concern is until we get all of this right, I'd be really concerned about any kind of proactive approach with the police, because I also know there's the way that kind of the TSG is allocated has sometimes been used for operations that have targeted young people, specifically if young people are identified as committing kind of thefts and stuff in an area. I know that sometimes the borough commanders have applied for kind of TSG support for those, and I just think that's where I feel like a child first approach hasn't really been taken, but that's a kind of it's a decision they're making rather than children coming in contact with the police. So I just think it's that dynamic of that, making that decision to be in contact with children.
I think actually, I mean, I've had a very different experience with schools officers. I think they play a real key preventative role in safeguarding children. The fact that, I've had a lot of teachers actually call me and ask that, get updates on when a new school officer would be recruited, because they really help in making sure that it's another trusted adult in the space of safeguarding. So actually making sure that we have a child-first approach and that training is given out and it is monitored and made sure that those interactions are effective. But I think we should shy away from thinking that police aren't part of the prevention and safeguarding of children. We have to understand that children are also exceptionally vulnerable to being victims of crimes, so having that reassurance, especially at key transit times, of an officer visible is important. On TSG, obviously that's an operational decision, but my understanding is that TSG can only be enacted when there is a significant, you have to prove that there's a reason for them to be deployed. So for example, Section 60, which there's clear legislation around.
Yeah, I think it's just, so that's really helpful, and I think it's just that making sure that we're really taking a child-first approach. So in all of your examples, making sure that, we've got the right kind of youth workers and teachers kind of enabled to really support young people. But I just think it's thinking of those decisions in the context of some of the findings from these reports. Thank you.
That's right, TSG are only deployed. Would that there were double the numbers of them, that they could just go anywhere, but they can't. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. This is just staying with the children's strategy. We were told that it was going to be published in 2023, and it was published in September 2024. Now, that's before your time in office, and no reflection on you. But how can we be assured that the commitments made within the children's strategy will not similarly face delays? What assurances could you give us?
Well, I'll give you my personal assurance that, that the outcomes will be followed through, because it's something that is intrinsically right. But also, I think the fact that the police have taken their time in working it through and making sure that they've consulted with young people, making sure that they've consulted with people like the London Police Board, really feeding in a lot of expertise, shows that they are really committed to doing this work. I was with Umnesh in Newham, and actually completely a pro of nothing. I didn't ask a question of it. The Inspector Singh talked very passionately about the child strategy and the child-friendly approach. So I think it is something that, you know, officers know. They're on the front lines. They know that they are primarily dealing with children and young people, and they want to get it right too. So I think it is something that has come at a time where we all are talking about it. It's something that, you know, you'll know from being a leader, that we've talked about trauma-informed practice, child safeguarding for a long time now. And it's great to see that the Met and MOPAC are taking up this approach, and it's something that I'm really excited about working with them to embed and make sure that we do get it right. And it is through the accountability of that we will push those improvements.
Thank you. I wonder if you share my concern, therefore, that when we see important pieces of work like this with a clear published date, that if there are delays, significant delays, nearly a year, that necessarily may have an impact on confidence of those people that are interacting with this strategy, that are expecting to be served by that strategy.
I mean, I think delays are always concerning, especially if you're expecting them to come out. But I suppose it's understanding the rationale for the delay. What I wouldn't want is for something to be rushed through, that's not ready, that's not thought through, that's not got that assurance, that evidence-based, that consultation, hasn't had the allowance for change. I understand that a year is a significant amount of time, and I wasn't here when that happened, but I don't think you want the right policies and the right strategies and the right evaluation framework. And as the Chair pointed out previously, that the right implementation plans have been thought through as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If I can just say to you, this isn't a one-off. The Stop and Search Charter is very, very late. Very many of these programmes are very, very late. Very, very late. So this isn't a one-off. So it might be something you want to look into. Has the delivery group that will oversee the Met's children's strategy been established yet?
I think that's being worked up as part of the implementation plan.
So that we don't know who's going to be on it yet?
No, not yet.
Okay, perhaps you'll let us know when that's established as well. Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Deputy Mayor. I can hear your passion for a child-first strategy, and the fact that the Met has taken this on board is a very different conversation we're having now from what we were, I think members of the committee would agree, from 2 years ago. And I think the lens that we're now looking at child protection in terms of the Met is, I think, hugely in part to do with a lot of the questions and the scrutiny this committee has taken of the issue over the last few years. Deputy Mayor, how do you think MOPAC's monitoring and training is being received by Met officers? And is it sufficient to make a tangible difference to how children are protected?
I mean, can I also agree with you, Assembly Member Ahmed, that I do think that the committee's continual pushing on this area has, brought into focus the need. But I think you should be assured that through the oversight and training of MOPAC, that there has already been 1,000 child protection officers, over 1,000 child protection officers trained in effective identification and investigation of child exploitation. So there's a clear outcome from the training and oversight of MOPAC so far, and I hope that that will continue to increase so that we're getting this right.
Thank you. And will that training also, that's 1,000 officers who've been trained, is that specifically around the area? Or is it just officers on a day-to-day basis of the work that they're doing? Because obviously child exploitation and child protection should be completely intrinsic to the training that officers receive.
Yeah, so that's a starting point. And officers were also trained in eradicating things like victim blaming language, and in that instance, over 6,000 sergeants and police officers, staff equivalents, have been trained in what is the programme called First Level Leadership Training. And by April 2025, this training will be delivered to all inspectors and police staff equivalents. So, as I said, it's a starting point, but it's something that there has been dedicated plans to increase.
Right, thank you. Thank you. My next question, how will MOPAC's Children and Young Adult Violence and Exploitation Support Service ensure that it meets its target of 500 to 600 interventions per year for children at risk of falling into violence and crime?
Thank you. I think this is something I'm sure that you, the committee, and the Mayor should be exceptionally proud of. I mean, the Mayor's put in over £5.2 million per year into delivering this important service. I think it's also a really great illustration of the great partnership work that MOPAC and others are doing in this space, working with Safer London, St Giles Trust, New Horizons Youth Centre and the Anna Freud Centre. So we have a really powerful alliance there who will galvanise around delivering those outcomes. So we're talking about a package of over 16 million over 3 years. The target of 6,000 children, young people, young adults each year has been clearly set as a goal, so no one can be in doubt of that. The service has only been live for a full quarter so far, and has already reached 200 young Londoners who are actively receiving support.
Thank you. How has the Met's new Connect system been improving data recording of children who are at risk?
I think I'm going to have to get you more information on that. But I obviously know that there has been some initial teething problems with the Connect service, but I know that that's been worked through. So I think it's really important that I come back to you with really clear data on that.
Would appreciate that. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts, did you want to come in? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. It's just thinking about the children that are either excluded from school or regularly miss school, and obviously they are at greater risk because they're on the street during the day, unsupervised, unaccompanied. They're at greater risk of falling into criminal behaviour, gang-related activity. Could you give the committee some flavour of how the children and young adult violence and exploitation support services target and support children in that particular cohort?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think that that's obviously very important, and we know that there are increasing concerns about children missing from the education system. And I think that that's one of the reasons it's really important that we're working alongside trusted partners in this area who have that expertise, alongside youth workers, people who know how children at risk are, where they're likely to be, so that they can identify those children and make sure they are getting the support they need. But I completely agree, this isn't something that we're, using usual methods for, and it's making sure that we have those partners that have been working in these areas for a long time. I know that you'll know work of St Giles and others that are really experts in this area, so they know how to make sure they're reaching out to children who are on the kind of at-risk register.
Thank you. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. Morning. I wanted to start off first by talking about knife wands in schools, and the Mayor said that he's written to every head teacher and they're available. However, when I've spoken to school teachers, they like these in their schools, but they're not sure on the process of how to get them. Do you think that's something you could take away to make sure all schools that want a knife wand on site are able to follow that up properly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something really interesting that we can perhaps take through the education authorities of London with, and make sure that, like, that clear communication, if there is resources available, that schools that want to take it up can have access to it.
Thank you. And I appreciate the answers you gave earlier when you were talking to Assembly Member Garbutt about this. I mean, I think as somebody that's watched someone be stabbed through the neck a foot away from me outside my school gate, I have a slightly different view on how important it is to have those preventative services from police officers in there. So thank you for your support for that earlier. I wanted to also talk about a couple of points in the Met's children's strategy before my next questions. One on the point of adultification, which is a strong point in the strategy. But my concern is that we are missing the general bias for girls in here, girls who suffer sexual abuse and rape and are often they're treated as adults when they come in as victims, or treated as criminals when they come in as victims. And I wonder if you would be willing to look at that in the strategy and implementation, and how we make sure that girls that have been victims of sexual abuse are also not treated through the ends of an adult.
I mean, Assembly Member Best, can I also just say I'm so sorry that you had to live through that experience. That sounds, horrific, and I'm glad that, that support was on hand for you there. I couldn't agree with you more. I think we need to make sure that we're looking through a gendered approach in all of our works, as well in the kind of wider equalities lens. But I do agree with you that how women and girls all over is viewed differently, and we need to make sure that we understand the specific lived experience of girls in those situations, and that we're responding to it very strongly, and making sure that we work with people with expertise in that area to do so. So definitely we want to make sure that we're picking up the vulnerabilities and make sure that the young girls are not being adultified. I think it's something that is key in the strategy, and it's key that we make sure that that training is given, so that that child first. All children should be seen as children, but understandably, I'm sure we've all had, as females, experience of that in those teenage years.
Thanks. I want to be really specific that it does talk very strongly about the racial bias and adultification in terms of a racial lens, but I'm talking about specifically focusing on how girls experience that of all race, especially when it comes to sexual crimes, and so making sure that that as well is integrated into the child strategy, as well as the racial bias that is existing now. That bit of the puzzle is missing.
I completely agree with the point that does need to be looked for, and I think all equality lens, we need to make sure we're doing that. We need, we're launching upcoming our neurodiversity strategy, and I think that's another lens that we need to make sure that we're understanding how children with additional needs are experiencing policing and crime, and that we're adapting our strategies appropriately.
Thank you. And a final particular point to pick out from the children's strategy is just around the heavy importance it places on volunteer police cadets, quite rightly stating how important it is, how diverse it is, but actually already the reality is not bearing fruit of what the strategy says. The cadets are in real trouble. There's cadets having to leave units, that they're not getting the funding that they'll need to continue. Already we don't have an implementation plan, but what is happening does not reflect the strategy. Are you willing to look into that and work with the Mayor to make sure that we intervene and make sure that the volunteer police cadet unit can continue and be as successful as it has been?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we need to, as part of our trust and confidence work, it's really important that we explain to people why a career in the police is an important public service. And I completely agree with you that cadets are a brilliant way of doing that, as well as a positive interaction for young people to be involved in, and teaches them a lot of transferable skills. So that's definitely something I will look into.
Thank you. I appreciate if you took that away and lobbied that with the Mayor as well to make sure that the cadets do get that funding, 'cause for the reasons you pick up. Not only is it a positive experience, it's also a career path and actually one of the most diverse programmes that the Met runs in terms of gender and racial balance. I just wanted to pick up with you on Operation Encompass around domestic abuse that children witness at home. Within the children's strategy, there's not much detail on the hows and the timescales of implementation. Do you have further details on that?
I know that it's something that the Met has committed in the children's strategy to review their operation. It's called Operation Encompass, isn't it? The work to establish especially the public protection referral desks to enhance the current provision. I've not yet had sight of the review, but MOPAC will oversee this work and maintain wider engagement with the Met on engagement with schools through our seat on the Safer Schools Partnership Board, which carries membership across the MPS, key education and school representatives.
So how will that be monitored, any improvements that come from that?
So the Safer Schools Partnership Board will be the main body in which that is overseen, and the review will be overseen by MOPAC. But if that's something that you that review you want to get more information on, I'll make sure that it's sent to the committee. Please
do, especially in relation to the timescales as well. That would be really helpful as to when we can see more. In what ways can MOPAC encourage and strengthen partnership working between the schools, stakeholders and local authorities as part of that operation? And how can we make sure it's embedded well in every London borough?
I mean, I think it will be through that partnership board where education partners are key to that. I think as well that, you know, working with partners in the violence reduction unit, that it's something that we need to really look forward in the implementation plan on what the engagement strategy is going forward and how we can convene partners in schools, but also, as Assembly Member Roberts said previously, how we're making sure that alternative provisions and pupil referral units and the wider kind of youth sphere is brought into our ongoing conversations around the children's strategy.
Thanks. Sorry, who was on that partnership board? I think you.
The partnership board is made up of the MPS, MOPAC, and key education and schools representatives. If you wanted
if we could get more of
like a breakdown of
who that means and how that kind of will make, how that's a board that will make sure that information goes across the whole of London and every borough, that would be, if we could see the actual list, I think that would be helpful. And the final question from me is around the section of the children's strategy that suggests, along with MOPAC, the Youth Justice Board and CPS, there'll be an additional rollout of training for solicitors and legal advisors to help them when they're advising children in custody. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? And perhaps, there's a pilot scheme launched this month? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that was the pilot scheme that I made reference to earlier in answering Assembly Member Garbutt's question. That it's really important that we fully agree with you that solicitors are trained in giving appropriate legal advice to children. The Child First Custody Training Research Pilot, or CHIRP, has been funded by MOPAC, Metropolitan Police, and the London boroughs of Haringey and Enfield, and will be launched in November the 13th it was launched, and the aim of the pilot is to provide specialist support from custody staff and specialist legal representatives at the point of arrival at police stations.
Could you just be clear, sorry, on some of the key differences from what's happening now to the pilot? What's the addition to what
Yeah.
would be expected?
So the pilot aims to address disparities of experiences and outcomes for children at police stations. So it's addressing the issue of disparities, and it wants to decrease the number of children detained in police custody so that legal advice is advising children to make sure that that happens, and reducing the amount of time spent in custody for children. So making sure that their rights and that the child-first approach is embedded in the response of officers as their advocates.
But how does that pilot change from what is experienced outside the pilot?
I believe, and obviously I wasn't here, but okay, I believe that the pilot has been based on the recommendations of the child strategy on the outline of concern about how legal advice was given previously, and that they have fallen upon the aims of disparity of outcome for children and the number of children in custody and time spent in custody is key areas to improve
okay,
on.
Can I be clear? Is it about perhaps making the legal advice more child-friendly and how it's discussed with them?
Yes, obviously, sorry.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think it's really important that children understand exactly what's happening to them in custody, that they understand clearly why things are happening and what is being happened. But also, I think it's about understanding that, that they are fully furnished with the rights of children and the safeguarding rights to give advice, for example, perhaps on the NRM or other things that should be utilised in safeguarding children and keeping them, from going for more punitive measures than necessary.
Yeah. So my concern here is I came from a children and young people background, and I think if I spoke to most solicitors, they'd think they were doing that. So I'm just really interested, perhaps in further detail outside the session, on what is the actual training and how, and more the how of what this is doing instead, because I do think, like I say, if you speak to most solicitors, they would say exactly what you just said, and they would believe that they are already giving that advice now. So I'd be interested in how we're improving that, but not for now, if it's easier to come back.
Yeah, I mean, I'd definitely be happy to come back, but I think it's clear that this pilot wouldn't have been set up and the child strategy wouldn't talk about it if that was felt. So it's really important that we understand the expertise of the legal advice, but make sure that those key tenets are being taken forward.
Like they might not be right in their assertion they do that, but they would think they're doing that to the point. So it would be interesting to know what this adds.
Okay.
For another time.
Thank you. Assemblymember Garbutt.
Thanks. Just had a quick question about whether you're aware of the Holding Our Own guidance that Liberty published alongside human rights and young people's organisations back in April 2023. I just wondered if it's a guide that you're aware of.
No, but I can.
Yeah, it's really good. It's with a load of organisations from across London and the country that work with young people, and it's really got their voice about how they feel about policing and other kind of community approaches. I don't know if they're on your list, Liberty, or on your. I'm sure you've got a long list of stakeholders to meet, but it'd be great if you can meet with Liberty to discuss kind of their findings and the work that they do for young people.
Thank you, and thank you for that recommendation. I think it's really. I mean, what I have noted since I've started in the role is throughout that dedication to engage with young people. We're looking on the London Policing Board coming up on the Stop and Search Charter, and that's another key area which I believe needs to have the voice of children and young people. And the strategy really talks about how we embed the voice of children and young people at the strategic level and the day-to-day interactions. So that's something that I'd be keen to read. Thank you for the
recommendation. Great, I'll ask them to send it to you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Right, okay, that finishes that section, Kaya. So we're now going on to live facial recognition. So how does MOPAC measure the effectiveness of live facial recognition technology in reducing crime and its impact on public trust and confidence?
MOPAC conducts ongoing oversight of the MPS use of live face recognition and associated technology. MOPAC sits on as observers on the MPS Facial Recognition Technology Board, offering support and posing critical challenge.
In a previous role, you have been opposed to the use of live facial recognition. But now that you're a few weeks into this job, has your view changed?
As I said previously, I think it's important to understand that motions are political tools, if you will, to bring about a wider campaign of change. And I think that it's only right and, you know, part of the oversight of myself and MOPAC and others, including yourself, is constantly challenging the best way to keep Londoners safe and all Londoners safe. So I have been looking at, and I'm looking forward to getting to be involved in the oversight of this area. I think all of the tactics, as I mentioned before, like stop and search, we need to continually review to make sure that they're being used proportionately, lawfully and ethically. Ethically.
I know I can never say that word either. You're in good company there. We can't. Many of those who are against the use of this technology often don't have an understanding of how it is used by the officers in actual practice. Do you think you've got a better understanding of how the Met are using it now? And which guardrails are in place that have hopefully made you more pro-AI?
Pro-AI?
Artificial intelligence.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I definitely think that the Met should overall use, you know, look at using new technology across the sphere of criminology and policing, but it has to be within the realms of being lawful, proportionate and ethical. And I think there's a lot of scope in all areas of policing to use AI. I mean, I think on what you mean, particularly on live facial recognition, I think it's incumbent on us to hear the voices of people who have concerns about that, but understand that it is a legal and tactical methodology that the police currently use. And there's been some, I was similarly again, when we were with Umnesh, I was actually interested to hear the police's description there of how they've used live facial recognition technology because we were in Stratford and where there's a lot of footfall and the positive outcomes that had come there, and actually some of the demographic characteristics. I was actually, you know, I thought it was very interesting that some of the outcomes that they had were around breaches of sexual offences and relation to children. So I don't think you can say that overall any, you know, legal tactic can be, you know, completely wrong. What I'm saying is, and this is something that we will continue to review. I know there was already one review through MOPAC of live facial recognition, and there's a second one coming up. I think it's something that we need to be continually mindful of, and I know that the policing minister as well is looking at, understandably has stated that the legislation currently on data protection and human rights, she feels does cover a lot of the use of technology in this, but that there is wider discussions to be had on the use.
Have you looked at the figures, the amount of people that have been arrested and people with really bad criminal backgrounds that have actually, it's assisted the police in getting those people back behind bars? Have you been shown those figures?
Yes, so 460 arrests.
I mean, I know the figures, but I'm asking if you did, and you've got it written down in front of you. So you did. So if the police said to you they wanted to do something in Islington using live facial recognition, would you be quite relaxed with that?
Well, I do know from having experience of it that they do notify the local authorities anyway before the use of live facial recognition.
Yeah, but I'm asking, are you quite relaxed about that in your own borough, that they would be using it?
I mean, I'm now the deputy mayor for the whole of London, so they'll be using it across London. It's a recognised tactic.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just saying Islington because I know there was a dispute in Islington and a couple of other boroughs that they didn't want it used there. Are you quite relaxed that it's being used in Islington?
I'm relaxed.
My
role now is for the whole of London. I am clear that this is a useful tactic that the police are using across London. I'm saying that I think we need to continue to review it, as we do all police tactics, to make sure through oversight and scrutiny that the police are doing their very best for the safety of all Londoners.
Yes, they are. So if your former colleagues kick up because live facial recognition is being used in Islington, you'd explain the benefits of it to them?
I think, genuinely, that good oversight is listening to the concerns of other people and making sure that their concerns are heard, but also being fair and balanced as, using the information we have. I think that that's one of the great things about MOPAC I've really enjoyed since I started, is the high level of analysis and robust evaluation that they do in these areas, and it gives me great comfort that MOPAC are doing a second review in this area, and that the policing minister is looking at this area too as an area of balanced concern about whether the concerns of people are borne out, what should be done differently, but also that it is a very useful, currently used tactic that is helping with arrests of people.
That's right, and there's some people that are very dangerous and need to be behind bars, so I'll leave it there, but I'm glad you're warming more, it would appear, to live facial recognition. Assemblymember Duval.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can we just... So we've had a long lead-in period of over a good couple of years now of facial recognition project. If we're going to embed it more, shouldn't we be looking more about the use of budgets and the planning of its use rather than the ad hoc arrangements that appear to be happening? In July, the Mayor was asked a specific question around the costs, and he informed, I presume it was the Assembly, that they're not collated. So why is this information not available, and how does MOPAC monitor the cost effectiveness of LFR, and shouldn't we start looking for budgets if we're going to fully utilise this scheme in the future?
I agree, Len, that its effectiveness must be continued to be monitored, and the the cost of policing is a very live issue at the moment. So we must always look for ways. Similarly, I've been looking a lot at technology use in the call centres. That's another area that, if we get right, has the ripeness for creating great efficiencies on constrained budgets, and that's important. And I think the frontiers of AI and technology are in that we use technology to drive efficiency, but also improvement of standards. So I think it's something that we need to continue to look at, and I think with the budgets of all of us being extremely constrained after having 14 years of austerity and public services where they are with their budgets, that it's only right that we look at that, but we also need to make sure that is done effectively, ethically, legally, and make sure that the policing still remains. I was at the APPC conference yesterday, and it's really important that we never shy away from the human connection, the neighbourhood policing. Hearing the Home Office, the Secretary, Yvette Cooper, talk about, the importance of neighbourhood policing is something that I think we can all get behind. So it's a balance, isn't it? Because you don't want to get away from that connection, that community response of policing, but technology obviously offers improvement.
So could you write to us, not telling us where the deployment is for the next year, but what are the plans for the MPS over the coming years about deployment of facial recognition in areas, as in terms of the guidance that the MPS has said where it will locate those areas? Because I think there is a real concern that because of the budget pressures that you face, that actually we won't be fully utilising this technology to the best in the best way for the MPS. If without a budget line, without a proposed budget line, someone's paying for it whenever it's being deployed, but we couldn't, because we asked the Mayor, he couldn't determine where it was being, what were the costs that were being associated with the project, and what's going to happen in the future. And I'm concerned because I think this is a really useful scheme, and we need to see it made sustainable. And call me old-fashioned or not, to be it sustainable, I need a budget line, because if I don't have a budget line, I'm not sure how it's going to be taken forward in the future. So could you write back to the committee and just explain that a little bit more in detail? We don't need to know where it's being deployed. We have a good idea of that when where the MPS have published the guidance of likely locations of where it will be deployed and the circumstances it is. But it would be interesting to see what the plan is for the next couple of years.
I completely agree with the principal. I think that is a question for the Met themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
So I will
need
ask
you to pass it on. Yeah. Thank you. Look, can I just now turn to it? As you...
Assemblyman, can I just...
Yeah.
We've been asked by the broadcasters, can you be more in line with your... That's it, thank you. More straight on, because it's not... Thanks, it's not capturing it. Apologies.
We all do it. We all do it, and I'm the worst offender. Look, can we now return to... Look, you would imagine from my line of question, I'm a big fan of this technology and how it can be used, and not as a replacement for others. I just think it's about a range of tools that can protect the public and get people that seek to evade justice in terms of their behaviours. So with that in mind, I do agree with you, and you've answered it partially, that for this technology to work appropriately, it does need a lawful, ethical, proportionate and transparent issues around that. So let's go to it. How do you view the House of Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee in its conclusions that it thought the current methods, so we have to go back, this was in January 2024, things may have moved on, that the current methods of oversight, I presume these are the national oversight arrangements, but would have some impact of our work here in the MPS, of LFR are not sufficient? And if so, what's the action MOPAC's taken to strengthen that oversight? Where do you think the direction of travel is since that report's been published?
So on the MOPAC oversight, we've been focused on ensuring that, as I said, that is legal, ethical and effective, and that we are going to be doing, I think the last review was done in 2016, so I think it's a good time to look at that review again. I think that the Minister Diane Johnson has been involved in national debates on this, and recognises the potential for it to be transforming for policing, as well as genuine concerns around misidentification, misuse, and the effect on human rights. So I know that she's also at the national level going to be looking at this issue further. So I'm sure that we will be looking at it through our groupings around crime commissioners and deputy mayors for policing, to look at how we can convene around this issue and get the right oversight for it. But I think you should be assured that there's regular oversight through a technology committee, and also that we are going to be doing this review.
Okay, well, that might be useful to share with us as background information if we come to comment further on this particular issue. it's rather sad that there isn't a police presence sitting beside you, because I think the mission to explain is one of the weaknesses of the Metropolitan Police Service. So the engagement with Londoners, I know that MOPAC has done a lot of work on this, but then, you know, how does MOPAC engage with Londoners, and what does it want to see the police do to be informed and hear feedback in terms of the use of LFR?
Thank you. I mean, obviously, you know that MOPAC does engagement with Londoners continually through tools like Talk London. We're also looking in the year ahead at doing a whole big review on our engagement and partnership strategy. That's something that I'm really excited to, you know, be a part of working on. I've already, you know, been going out on visits, and I will be going to Edmonton tomorrow to continue that. And I think we need to make sure that, you know, part of our work in MOPAC is making sure that we're hearing the voices of Londoners and how community safety at its best will look like. And I think, you know, we must continue to push the Met to do the same. I was, you know, reading some of the things around the consultations on the Stop and Search Charter, which I know is taken too long, but what I was, the principles around that, about actually that being a charter for the community, written by the community, I think is really around the principles that we do want to be seeing, and similarly with the children's strategy. So I think we've got some really strong green shoots in that area, and we need to continue to push. I think the work through the new Met for London plan puts intrinsically to the centre of it that, you know, those Peelian principles of us being a civilian police force, meanings that we have to engage with our residents and our business owners in London. So it's something that I'm deeply passionate about. The strategy's coming forward in the new year, and it's something that, you know, through the police and crime plan, this 8 weeks consultation is another illustration of where we need to go out and, you know, side by side in the Met in that, and make sure that we're hearing the voices of Londoners.
Well, it would be good to have a police presence sitting beside you to also explain that. And I think the chair said earlier on, we want you to show us that your direction of travel, how you're coming across on these issues. And I think that did in that question around how passionate you are about that community engagement. I think the police are passionate about it, but actually what we're seeing is this reluctance to engage and explain, because I think the chair was right. If it's explained properly, it overcomes some of the worries and fears that some communities have, but more so that Londoners, that actually that policing is not out of control. There are checks and balances, and for a majority of time, the police seek to operate within those.
That's absolutely correct. We all agree on this. We do need a police presence here. And I must say, I completely agree with Assemblymember Duval securing the finance for the live facial technology. It's an incredible tool, and we cannot expect the police to do their jobs the best as they can without giving them the tools that they need. And the amount of arrests for really bad individuals through live technology has been very impressive. Assemblymember Garbutt.
Thank you. I really welcome the scrutiny of live facial recognition, because I think we all agree that not enough scrutiny has happened. I would like to say that I think people with all different views have a range of understandings, and I think people who are concerned about the use of this technology include human rights organisations, academics, and people who have reviewed policy and practice. And I do support Assemblymember Duval calling for more scrutiny of the funding, but I would say that it is difficult to assess its effectiveness without that. I've been asking lots of questions to understand the money element. And also we need to look at it compared to other traditional ways of policing. I don't know if people saw that there was a stabbing in Croydon 100 metres away from where the live facial recognition was deployed, showing that obviously it hadn't had a, we just need to look at it in the round. But my question is about how the Met have consulted on the changes in the recent LFR policy. So there was recent changes to the published LFR policy online. And I just wondered if you knew what consultation had done before these and if MOPAC was consulted.
I would have to get you the specific details on the consultation point, but I think it's really, as you know, before the use of LFR, in advance of that, it has to be placed on the Met website and through social media. That's put up forward before that they take that in most circumstances, unless there's a real strong reason for it not to be, and there's always signage where it's in use as well, so that it's clear that it is being used. They are being very open and transparent in that directive. But in terms of the consultation before the changes, I would have to go back and ask MOPAC what consultation.
Yeah, because there was a couple of things that big changes that happened in the policy that was published a few weeks ago. It was really interesting when you mentioned the MOPAC first review of live facial recognition. I wonder if you knew what impact, if any, that had, and what your kind of framing for this second MOPAC review is.
Yeah, so it examined the use of LFR and the ethics of its use. That was the aim of it, and it set out 5 conditions. It believed that it kind of framed the reasonable use of it, so the rationale for use of it in 5 areas. So what the benefit to... is that okay? Can you hear me okay? That one? It's there? Is that okay? Over there? Okay, I'll move. I can try that way. It shows a marginal benefit and sufficient to compensate for any distrust it might invoke. That it shown from trial data that the technology itself will not import unacceptable gender or racial bias in policing operation, and that the use of it is sufficiently robust to ensure that LFR deployment is appropriately assessed and authorised when it's being judged as needed, and it can show that human operators will be knowledgeable about the potential injustices that it may cause, and that the MPS and MOPAC develop a robust governance and oversight of the arrangements. So I think that revisiting this and the research that was done 5 years ago needs to re-examine where we are currently with...
Kaya, we're just going to replace your microphone. That's it.
Thank you.
Apologies.
Okay. Is that better? Oh gosh, significantly. Okay, good. So the London Policing Ethics Plan are now revisiting their research done from 5 years ago, which fed into the review, re-examining where LFR is currently. And so we can use that to help aid the future review. So it will be looking at where those recommendations were previously and where we've moved on, because obviously it's technology, it will have moved on in itself, and the evidence we've had through deployments and getting a holistic picture of its use.
That's great to hear, because, yeah, it'd be good to know who else you'll be listening to, if you'd just be looking at kind of evidence from the Met, or are you looking at some of the other kind of academics and organisations who've also been scrutinising the use of live facial recognition?
No, we're definitely already talking to the London Policing Ethics Panel, although I get that that's partly the Met, but I think it's really important that we do hear the concerns of a wide range of people, as well as, you know, where it's being used positively, and the data, to make sure that we have a data set and analysis that is robust, because how could we make recommendations if that's not the case?
Yeah, I'd completely agree that that holistic review of it's really important. I know you touched a little bit on legislation before, but my next question is just about the dedicated legislation covering the use of LFR, and you think this is needed? Because at the debate at the House of Commons last week, there seemed to be a consensus emerging on the need for proper regulation of the technology, and I just wondered if you've spoken to the government about the need for that dedicated legislation.
I understand that the EU has brought in certain legislation on it already, and I know that Diane Johnson has said that this is a live issue, and it's something that has been raised a lot through debates in the national sphere. So I think it's something that she's already committed to reviewing. I do think she has set out where the law, the human rights law and the common law powers and guidance from the College of Policing sets out the current parameters to ensure effective and ethical use of it. But it's something that she clearly wants to look at again, and I think we need to support her to do that.
Great, thank you. And just a last question. I know we've obviously the chair mentioned some of the motions that councils have passed across London. I just wondered what MOPAC or the Met's engagement have been with these boroughs who have obviously raised concerns about the use. And I just wondered how those motions and the recommendations have been taken forward by MOPAC or the Met.
I'm sure you all know because I've seen questions and letters from yourselves that MOPAC has a dedicated service of making sure that they respond to all things that are put to them, and I think actually through this review is another key area where we can go to the local authorities that have raised issues around this and make sure that their concerns are heard as well, because I'm sure many of you have been councillors or council leaders, so you'll know that actually the expertise that you hold in this area will be really important about, where is a good place to use it and where communities might have concerns, and what work the Met needs to do alongside us to make sure that we're bridging all of that so we can use this most effectively.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Desai.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't intending to come in, but in light of some of the things that have been said, I think I've got to give a counterbalancing perspective. And if I may say so, Chair, more from a constituency perspective. But firstly, let's get the government's position on this very, very clear. The Prime Minister was very direct after the Southall riots in calling for greater use of live facial recognition technology. He made this during the course of a statement on television immediately after the riots. So there's no ifs, no buts about the government's approach to the use of live facial recognition technology. Secondly, in his term, the police actually did use it, were good enough to tell local elected reps and then traders and others what they were planning to do, which I thought was wrong, actually, because I would rather they did the operation and then tell us the successes or failures or whatever, because you can inadvertently alert people. But the traders who I met and went and spoke to, the place, especially also the banks, is notorious for muggings, for robberies, assaults, amongst other things. And from what I've gathered, it did work. But thirdly, coming to Islington is not the only council that passed a motion condemning the use of live facial recognition technology. I think there's got to be pointed out to some of these councils that have passed such policies. There's one particular council that actually asked the police not to go ahead with using this technology to counter street robberies. They are not the Police and Crime Commissioner of London. It is Sadiq Khan, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner of London, and as I understand it, the position from City Hall is very clear, Chair. We support the use of live facial recognition technology with checks and balances and ongoing scrutiny, but we are not against it as a matter of principle. So I think it would be good for one or two of these councils to be told in no uncertain terms that they are not the Police and Crime Commissioner of London. They can give a view, but they cannot tell the police what to do locally.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that you laid the point out perfectly at the end of your comment, Assemblymember Desai. I think we all agree that this is a legal, effective tactic that is being used. I think what we need to continue to assure ourselves is that that's the case, that the concerns are being listened to, that it's being done proportionately, effectively, and I understand your point about how it's done tactically, what levels of transparency, but I think actually the fact that they have gone forward and put in alerts on how that will be used is an illustration that they want to do this in a transparent way, and obviously making sure that the outcomes of all of those things are assessed is no bad thing. I mean, I completely am aware that everyone agrees that this is a tactic that should be used, and you're completely, obviously, the operations of the Metropolitan Police are not even for me to have comment on. It's the strategic oversight that we're all here to ensure.
Chair, just to emphasize, this puts the local police in a very difficult position, because on one hand, it is an operational matter, but as I said, there's a difference between a council giving a view and then telling the police, no, not to go ahead and do something. There's a clear difference in those two approaches. And then the police are caught between what they feel that they're not getting the support, and at the same time want to do their duties, their job. I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely, Anna, because we don't want Europe getting involved with the ECHR, which of course is what happened last time, which is a shame. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo some of the points made by Assembly members from other parties regarding the need for us to have senior police officers attending these committee meetings. As Assembly Member Deval very clearly articulated, there's an explanation piece which only really they can help with. So I wonder if you have yet already to do so, whether you might be minded to write to the Commissioner, informing him that it's your expectation as Deputy Mayor for Policing that there is sufficient senior officer presence at these meetings?
I'm conscious of the Met obviously also have the London Policing Board, that through the Casey review they are being held accountable to. I obviously meet the Commissioner regularly through our bilateral meetings, which are an important sphere for us to discuss these issues. I will commit to raising, I've heard very clearly and loudly from a number of Assembly members that the strength of feeling around this, and I will continue to raise it with him. But I am conscious that this committee agreed the recommendations of the Casey review, and one of those was no. Can I just make it clear, if you'll forgive?
Yes, of course.
The London Policing Board is made up of members chosen by the Mayor, so they are marking the people that he's chosen are marking his own homework. We come from every single political party around. We represent very different views at times, and that's absolutely fine. But that is the difference. The London Policing Board is made up of people that the Mayor has chosen to actually scrutinise him. That is not proper scrutiny at all. It's here that we can do our own job that we have all been voted in to do. We need the police here. So going back to Assembly Member Garrett, will you please write to them? Thank you. Thank you for...
Thank you. And if you do write, I wonder if you might be able to share that correspondence with the committee. That will be most helpful.
I mean, I think this is a public meeting. The strength of feeling is clear. It's on record. I mean, I have committed that I will raise the issue with him. It's something that we've also talked about. I recognise that, as I said at the previous hearing, that the democratic legitimacy of this committee is different to the advisory board of the London Policing Board. I was just recognising that the Casey review added the policing board as an oversight body. So I think I would be wrong of me not to be transparent in the feedback that I've received, that the Met feel a little
no, but I don't recall the case review downgrading this committee.
No, of course not.
Which has happened as a result of the policing board being established.
I understand that is your perspective. I think the fact that the Mayor of London and the Commissioner came to the plenary, I hope shows the level of commitment. The safety of London is the Mayor's #1 priority. I, will come monthly and, dedicate my time to making sure that you're appraised of issues. As I said, I understand the strength of feeling. It's very clear. I will go back and I will talk to them about it.
Yeah. Thank you. Back onto the agenda. In your opinion, should live facial recognition technology be deployed in the policing of protests or demonstrations? And if so, under what circumstances?
I think currently that it's clear that it is not being used. I think we need to be very clear that it's not being used in protests and demonstrations. I think I want to be clear because I understand that there have been some assertions, perhaps misunderstanding that, and that individuals are not placed on a watch list on the basis of protest activity, and that the use of live facial recognition is rightly used to identify wanted offenders and helping to keep the public safe. It's not my decision on where it should be used.
Nor was that the question. It was, in your opinion, should it be used as part of the policing of protests or demonstrations?
I would need to understand a clear rationale of why it would. In the current legislation and guidance around it, I'm not sure that a protest would fit the bill of why it should be used.
There's very different types of protests, of course. There could be an organised march. There's some of the unrest that we saw during the summer originally started as protest, but rapidly developed into violence. Now, you can't really ask people to stop what they're doing whilst you get the technology out and stick it up a pole. So, in your opinion, if there is risk of development into violent protest, would you consider it appropriate then?
Can you put your microphone
Oh,
on?
is it working? I've got the phone. I don't want to, we're talking about several hypothetical situations where, how would you, I don't want to answer a question with a question, but I think it's really important in terms of how you think these things through, and that's the importance of, I'm sure, how the Met thinks things through and the Commission and where to use tactical operational stances. But how would you assess that risk ethically? I think all of us know, especially in this sphere, that we need a clear rationale for that, because the scope for misinterpretation of that would be significant. So I think I wouldn't garner an opinion on that without understanding how those various risks would be assessed or put through a framework.
Thank you. Let me see, where are we? So we've had LFR deployed close to 200 times. So are you in a position to confirm that it's never been deployed at a protest or demonstration?
Yes.
Excellent. And retrospective facial recognition technology, do you have any information as to how often this technology is currently being used?
No, not on me. I would have to go back and get the numbers of that.
Okay, if that will be helpful if they could be provided to this committee. And its accuracy. Do we have any data relating to how accurate retrospective is? And again, if you just need to get it back to us in writing, that will be very helpful.
Yeah.
And the policy around retrospective facial technology is up for renewal in August 2025. Do you think it's likely that the Met will expand its scope to include other scenarios than that which it's currently being used for? Oh, your microphone.
The microphone needs to go on. If you notice, it's on when the red...
Yeah. Oh,
Right,
oh my
it's not
goodness.
working. We'll get you. What are you doing to these microphones?
You get an extra few seconds for additional thought.
You're working your way through the microphones, which is absolutely fine. Apologies again. Right, if you just turn it on, that's it.
Okay, is that working now? Yeah. I wouldn't, once again, I think it's really important, I think in all that we do, that we're evidence-led. So, you know, I would think that there would need to be a clear rationale on where those new areas would be, what the evidence so far is showing us and telling us, and then, you know, the policy should follow the evidence.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. No further.
Thank you. If I could just explore this just a little bit. The recognition system was used at Notting Hill because there were lots of people there, etc. It was also used, and successfully, I think it's great, used at an Arsenal-Tottenham football match. I imagine we're on different sides on that one. I'm a massive Tottenham supporter. But, I mean, it was used on there, and actually found one very bad sex offender, I think, from reading a lot on. So if it's used on those sort of occasions, why can't it be used in these mass demonstrations when actually there's so many faces that are coming towards people? It could be that there's, I mean, if they find a sex offender in a Tottenham and an Arsenal game, why would they not find one with lots of people walking through the streets? What would be the difference?
I don't think that I'm saying that there is a difference. I'm saying it's not currently used.
No, I know it's not currently used. I mean, you're the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. I'm just wondering what your views are.
My views would be that wherever it's used, that it should follow the guidance.
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. We all agree with that. But what I'm saying to you is that if it's okay for it to be used at a football match or at Notting Hill, what is the rationale for not using it? And I know it's not used at demonstrations. In your view, what is the rationale? Have you asked what the rationale is for it not being used at demonstration, but being used at a football match or a carnival?
That's clearly for the Commissioner to decide in terms of operational use. But I think what I was trying to say to Assembly Member Roberts is where it is going to be used, if any scope for expansion of use, that the rationale and the assessment of it needs to be clear. I'm sure that was clear in the deployment on Notting Hill and on football matches, that there has to be you know, a framework of the reason for use, because that's how we can assure ourselves of the effectiveness, the importance of deploying that tactic.
Yeah, OK. Well, since we haven't got the benefit of having a police officer here, because I could ask and indeed would ask, could you go back and ask for us and make sure that we get a written answer as to why? There must be rationale. It'd be so much better if we could clarify that now. But thank you for that. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. I don't wish to bore anyone in the committee, but I am going to go back to this comment you made around the London Policing Board almost replacing our meetings. And I just want to be absolutely clear that in the Casey review, she suggested that the London Policing Board would replace an internal oversight committee of the policing. And so this isn't a stretch on their resources. They've moved the way in which they do a meeting to make it more public and change who goes to it, but that is where the resource is. And I think that Baroness Casey would be absolutely horrified to hear you say that the officers are overstretched between the London Policing Board and this committee, because that was never the intention of her review or what anybody voted for. So just to be absolutely clear on that comment around police being stretched because of the London Policing Board.
So, I mean, I completely understand what you're saying, and I'm sorry if you felt that I miscommunicated that. I just think that it's really important that we recognise that the police there are other areas that the police are being asked to look at in terms of oversight, as much as they're being asked by the Mayor's Office.
You understand that the London Police Board, replaced an existing internal structure? So it's not an additional request. It was a way in which that Baroness Casey thought that oversight could have been done better. And it was in no way an overstretch of the resources. And like I say, I honestly think she'd be horrified to hear somebody say that the London Policing Board was taking police away from this function of oversight.
No, I agree, and I think that shows. I mean, I think the dedication of the Commissioner and the Mayor of London to come to the plenary recently, and I'm sure that I saw the level of oversight that Assembly members gave there, and I also recognise as a former democratically elected representative the real importance of that democracy, and that's why I have repeatedly said today that I will go back and I will ask for this point to be heard.
It's not an ask, though. It has to be a telling. The asking has happened. It has to be an understanding that it's important they're here, and you are telling them, as the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, you have to be here. Because let's be frank, it's also not fair. There's so many questions today where you're not getting a break in answering them, where you should be passing them over for an operational opinion. So for both of us to do this job today is harder. So you should be telling them, demanding. There should be no asking about it.
I mean, I think thank you, Assembly Best, for illustrating that your care for my welfare as well.
Absolutely.
But I'm obviously, this is my third week in the job. I think there's a lot of work to be done in ensuring that we all have constructive relationships in this. I have heard repeatedly, and I want to be clear that it is obvious to me the strength of feeling of the Assembly on this matter, and that I will convey that strength of feeling to the Commissioner.
Okay. I was interested when you were speaking with Assembly Member Desai. Obviously, we know Keir Starmer has had support about rolling out live facial technology for protest events or where there's these large gatherings, but it seems that you don't have the same impetus to do that. So is that a disagreement there? Do you think that's not the right way to go, or you just want to be, I want to be clear, you just want to get more advice that you're going to share with us on that?
Yes, okay. Assembly Best, it's the latter.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to the confidence that the Met has in the potential demographic bias in live facial recognition technology, is there any evidence that you'd want to point to which would either allay people's concerns or elevate concerns?
I think that's why I'm really keen that this review happens. I know that, obviously there has been, as Assembly Member Garbett illustrated, that there are a lot of community organisations and legal rights organisations that have raised concerns in this area, but I want to make sure that through this review we have a gambit of resources, a holistic look at the use of it, so that we can do our statutory duty in MOPAC of making sure that we have robust evaluation on it.
And when do you expect that work?
I believe that this work is about to start, and therefore I would expect in the next year that it would be concluded.
Okay. Because obviously when it comes to things like racial bias, you can see how concerns came up, but this technology has moved so fast, and I think it bears saying that when we look at the period between 2020 and 2022, we had like 28 alerts and 10 of them were false. And now we're looking at a picture where you're getting 800 alerts and about 25 to 29 are false. And the Met has actually already integrated the way in which the software is used, so that there is no racial bias in it. Because there was there's a point where if you go too low in how match in the match, that there can be a racial bias. So the Met have specifically looked to only start recognising at a point where there's no racial bias, and we can see in the statistics as well how fast this technology has moved on. So do you not feel at a point now to kind of reassure people that this is a safe technology, a useful tool, and it's not discriminatory?
I mean, I think, Assembly Member Best, you're absolutely correct in, as I said, the last review was 5 years ago, and we're talking about technology. So, you know, we know that our mobile phones are upgraded every year. So I think we need to, you know, really respect that technology moves at pace, and that's why I'm committed to doing this review now. And I will, you know, I think it's really incumbent on me, but also MOPAC and the MPS to look at all of the evidence, empirical, statistical, but also I think what we can't not hear is the big groups that have concerns as well. And whilst I understand that, you know, I think the lived experience of different communities are extremely important in this, partly because we know that there have been plenty of researchers in other areas around, you know, communities feeling over-policed, disproportionality. So in order to, you know, give a level of reassurance around tactical use of these things and the policies that sit behind them, I don't think it's any... there's no negative in looking at this holistically, because part of that, hopefully we get to a point where some of those concerns are allayed, but we need to make sure that we're creating the space to hear them and comparing them with the statistical analysis.
Yeah, of course I understand that. I just think, obviously, in the position of your position now, it's the perfect position to kind of champion where kind of the technologies move forward, and some of those fears, we already know, the evidence already shows that those are kind of misplaced fears around the technology itself. So I think you're talking about the wider use and how some people may feel over-policed, but there's a separate concern that the technology itself has a bias in how it picks people up, and actually that the technology has moved on further than where we were when that was the case. So I think there's a position as you to champion that. I think we're going to come into that in the next session, perhaps. It's just where, as a deputy mayor, it's championing the police and making sure that people know they are doing the right thing and they are what are serving the community.
Thank you. We're moving on to the next section now, which is gangs. And you're going to be irritated with me, and I don't blame you. The broadcasters have now said, can you move slightly away from... I know, don't shoot the messenger. Just if you push the machine just a little bit forward. No, away from. It's just a little bit blurred. Yeah. Yeah, let's...
Shall I try it now? Is that...
I'm sure that'll be fine. And if it's not, well, we'll ignore what the broadcasters say.
Okay.
That's perhaps not... Perhaps I shouldn't have said that, since they'll turn me off completely. I shall just shout. Yeah, broadcasters are the best people in the world. OK, so we're now going on to gangs. I'm starting these questions off. How, Kaya, would you describe the current nature of gangs and gang violence in London?
I think it's really important that this is an area of ongoing scrutiny from both the Mayor of London. It's something that he's invested £15.6 million in, and has set up a new violence and exploitation support service, which builds on an approach of over £22 million of mayoral funding committed since 2016 to 2024. So that, you know, shows a clear prioritisation to the commitment of continued to work on gun crime and knife crime, which is something that the Met has clearly stated is used by that there's a clear link between gun crime and organised violence. And sadly, half of shootings in London are linked to organised crime. I think it's also really important to recognise that the ONS latest figures show that the violent crime rate in London is lower than the rest of England and Wales, and still the average for the Met's group in most similar forces areas. So, you know, it's something that the Met and the Mayor of London is obviously continually to be a top priority. He's invested in the new violence and exploitation support service, but that there has been significant improvement along this in this area.
Okay, well, for anybody tuning in, let me give the figures. There's 146 active gangs. 52 of those are high harm gangs. So gangs are clearly a problem in London. I know we keep getting told that the rest of the country is worse than we are, whatever, but we're only interested in London, and lots of us do not feel safe. So it's something that needs to be looked at. If we look at recently at the issues around Chris Carver, well, based on your first few weeks in the role anyway, do you think MOPAC have learned any lessons from that particular case? And what would you think that they should do differently as an organisation if anything like that happened again?
Sorry, could you be clearer on your question? It generally was, as I was being confirmed, that the verdict of that case came through.
Yeah, were you aware of any of the case before that verdict came through? Were you in touch with, you know, did you know what was going on around the whole case? Were you aware of what was being said around the whole case?
Obviously, as a civilian through media, I was.
Did you watch the plenary with the Commissioner and the Mayor the other day?
Yes.
So you'll be aware of some of, certainly my issues with MOPAC over what they were saying during that time. Did you ask any questions about that?
I think it's really important that, you know, I feel very strongly that it was right that the verdict of that case, who are 12 Londoners who sat and through an extreme amount of evidence without prejudice came to a conclusion, and that we respect the verdict of that case. I think, you know, I am obviously a black woman. I know the strength of feeling that the black community have on this case. I think, you know, it is really difficult to see a young man lose his life. And I also strongly know, listening to police colleagues over the last 3 weeks, sorry, I don't want to get emotional, but how deeply they hold the responsibility of the specialist tactics around firearms.
Yes.
And how, you know, it's really important that we are conscious that they are doing a job that none of us would do.
Absolutely.
Just none of us would do. And there are always, as Assembly Member Desai said earlier, that there are always checks and balances on those, and that it's right that there are investigations, and sometimes where it's felt necessary by, you know, the right organisation to make referrals into those areas, full, you know, hearings on those cases, and that those verdicts are upheld and respected. And that would be my opinion on that.
Well, I agree with you. And for the past couple of years, I too have felt it for both the community that lost someone, but really for the police officers as well, who, this particular police officer, who is now in a terrible position. He's got money on his head. You know, his life has been wrecked by this. But he had no sympathy from basically MOPAC or the Mayor for that entire time. So what work has the Mayor got to do to actually repair that relationship? Because we cannot be, when something's going to court, we cannot be unbalanced with the comments that we're making in the background, can we?
I mean, I know that the Mayor of London has repeatedly put on record his recognition of the work of the firearms service. I've heard it repeatedly. So I think that, if I may, that is a mischaracterization of how he feels, because I think he deeply respects the work that they do and understands its importance as much as I do. But I know as well that it's really that we're talking about a loss of life here, and I know what you're saying about the officer who went through that, and I think actually the accountability bill is something that has reflected on that, and it brings improvements actually both on accountability but also protections for the police.
Okay, I think you're missing what I'm saying. I am saying that when something like that's going on, we've got to be far more balanced, especially people in the position of the mayor, in the position of MOPAC. We need balance. We don't need to be unbalanced, which is clearly what was going on before. But you obviously weren't involved too much in that. I'm glad you are now speaking to firearms officers and understand truly that they really do their very, very best at all times. In your view, from what you can see in the last few weeks, I mean, what is your view on how the Met does manage gangs? Because they are you've read out the statistics. They are responsible for an awful lot of the serious crime that goes on. What's your view about how we're doing it? I know the mayor may have spent 15.6 million on looking at this, but how do you think they're doing with this?
I think in several areas they're using some really innovative and important practices. Assemblymember Garbutt came to the drugs panel the other day, and I think that showed through several operations like Operation Yamata, which looks at London lines. So, you know, we've had significant work on county lines where organised crime takes drugs and transports them around the country. But actually, Operation Yamata looks at how drugs are transported and technology is used across London, and the organised crime that comes along with that. And the analysis of that is really important and hopeful. There's been several significant arrests in that, suspension of a high volume of drugs through that. So I think that it's really, you know, I was impressed at that operation and how it was working across partnerships to make sure that the police are tackling that. And I think it is really important that we understand that the mayor's investment in this area is a real show of his prioritisation around this area, but it's also a real dedication to understand the crime and the reduction of harmful, extreme, violent, serious crime is the responsibility of the police. But also that there's a lot that can be done in the prevention space to reduce this. If we're diverting young people who are horribly exploited by organised crime, then that's an important chopping off of the legs of that operation. So I think it is really, you know, the police are doing really important work in this, but it's important that also we work through our responsibilities and our partnerships and setting up the violence and exploitation support service with partners in the voluntary sector who have lots of experience in this. I'm sure you would have heard before about the Rescue and Response Service and the London Gang Exit Service, who have been doing amazing work in this area. So, you know, I think it would be wrong of me to say that, you know, there are no issues, but I think we should be really proud of the prioritisation, the investment, and the police's work in tackling these huge issues. And I think it's really obviously important that we continue to work with the national police and the international police to tackle this issue as well.
Yeah, and partnership working as a council leader, you'll know, is the best way to attack anything. I've always said that. Given that so much money is being put in this and that these gangs are so harmful, certainly 52 of them, have you got any KPIs around any of this? Are you looking to say to us in a year's time, I want there to be 10 less gangs, 20 less gangs, so many less high harm gangs? I mean, or does the money just go in and whatever happens, happens? Or are there checks and balances and KPIs?
Yes. So through the violence harm assessment, that's where we are looking through those KPIs and assessing and that through the impact assessment and ensuring that we're looking at obviously disproportionality, but also high harm offenders. It's built on the work that you'll all be aware of through the gang violence matrix and has a real clear evaluation and oversight framework.
Okay, I'm sure we'll hit on that another time. How does MOPAC contribute to and oversee the Met's monthly serious violence working group?
So MOPAC officers attend the Met Serious Violence Working Group, as you've mentioned. Through that, they gain insight into the Met's approach for tackling violence and current trends in London, which informs its oversight. And we also learn through our convening powers to support the further work tackling violence, which I mentioned earlier.
Okay. Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Mayor, I think it's evident that you have a real commitment to London's communities. Can you tell us how MOPAC, the Met and various partners are supporting those communities against the most violent offenders in London?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely do have that commitment, and also that commitment is illustrated by the £22 million that has funded programmes to provide specialist support to especially children and young adults impacted by violence and exploitation. As I mentioned previously, programmes comprised of London Gang Exit, Empower, Rescue and Response has seen over 2,750 young Londoners move forward positively in their lives and help them reduce the risk of their victimisation, but also, importantly, that violent behaviours, which obviously keeps London safer.
Thank you. The violence harm assessment was introduced in February this year. Can you tell us what oversight and scrutiny MOPAC has had of this process, please?
MOPAC has had significant engagement with the Met around the violence harm assessment, which was developed and launched and included a commitment for MOPAC to conduct an annual review of the violence harm assessment, as done previously on the gangs matrix. So this is something that will continue to happen, and that will look at especially demographic data on inclusion, and that will be also published quarterly, so will be transparent and able for scrutiny, particularly through the London Disproportionality Board.
And is that annual assessment, is that going to be then in February 2025? Is that when we're going to get the first assessment?
Shall I confirm that date for you? I don't want to say yes.
Yes, please. Yeah. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbett.
Thank you for your responses in this section. I know you mentioned this briefly earlier about the gangs matrix, but I just wondered if you could specifically talk to what has been learned from the criticism of the gangs matrix and how you continue within the kind of violence harm assessment and this approach to continue to listen to communities.
Yes, obviously the last review of the gangs matrix was done in 2018, so things have significantly moved on in various areas, but I think primarily our commitment around disproportionality is one of the key learnings that we had from the gangs matrix. So as I just said, ensuring the annual review, but also our regular meetings on that have a particular assurance around data, demographic data is important, and that is also not only looked at through the annual assessment, but fed through to the disproportionality board.
And can you just explain a bit about what you mean in terms of disproportionality within this context? Do you mean in terms of how people end up, like the whole, you mean it in terms of the whole process, if you get what I mean, in terms of how people are identified, the approach taken?
I have an opinion on that, and I don't want to, but let me get you a real clear outline of how that is done.
That'd be brilliant, thank you.
And at what stages, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Best.
Yeah, thanks. That was actually going to be my question as well around disproportionality board. That's another one to put up there with ethically, isn't it? So what is it actually doing? What is it actually looking at? For example, when it comes, at the end of the day, this is a really important tool to divert some of the most violent criminals away from that lifestyle and to protect the public. So obviously we want that process to be looking at making sure we target the right people, but beyond that, disproportionality, I don't want that to affect, trying to make targets up. For example, this is a list that is always going to be predominantly male. For example, that is kind of how violent offenders tend to skew, right? So, for example, I think at the moment there's actually I can tell you. There's 1,307 individuals on the list. 1,249 of those are male. Now, that's very disproportionate, but that's probably the appropriate response. Do you see what I mean? So I would really welcome some more information on what the disproportionality board is doing to make sure that the programme's doing what it's meant to do, but we have to accept that it's meant to target the right people.
Yes. What I would say about disproportionality is it's not whether something is evident, it's whether it's evident compared to what it rightly should be. So, if you had a set of data and you were seeing in that set of data a group of certain nationals that I won't name, I'm just trying to be illustrative, and that group, the population size of that group in London is significantly smaller than what would be expected to be seen in the data, that would be seen as a disproportionate amount. But what I will say is, on your point about it being, overly, the cohort being significantly male, I think that is really important, because the tools that we use around that in terms of prevention, the kind of partnership, the kind of expertise, therefore should follow that. So, what works with young men shouldn't be designed by people without expertise in that area. So that's why data and insight is so important, isn't it? Because we use the data and insight, especially around demographics, to enable us to come up with commissioning and services that respond to that need and help us reduce that. And I think it's really, you mention women and girls in that space, and actually that's something that we have seen an uplift in this space, and therefore we need to devise programs differently to make sure that we're covering that approach too, so that we are getting it right in the prevention space.
Yeah, I think that's helpful what you said, and I would appreciate more information, but that was why I asked the question, just because the disproportionality board, as a name in itself, I don't think quite clearly explains what it wants to do when it's reviewing that data, and how it wants to make sure that it's giving the best support to the people that have been identified to steer them away from offending. But I think that's been helpful, what you've said then, and if you could send more information on what they would look to do, that would be helpful. going further into women and girls involved or affected by gangs, in the latest quarterly report, MOPAC said that research into girls and women affected by gangs, violence and exploitation is due to be completed in Q2 of this year, with commissioning of further programme-based work to understand the lived realities of this cohort due to start in Q3 of this year. Are you able to provide an update on that?
So this is something that we're working with the University of Bedfordshire through their Safer Young Lives Research Centre on. So that should give us a really strong evaluation of that. The research has already highlighted that there's a considerable amount of work to be done raising awareness and support for the identification of girls and young women affected by gang violence and exploitation. So it's already coming up with significant insights into that area, and it's something that we need to continue. I was lucky enough in my previous role to work with groups like Abianda, who have done a lot of work in this space and have already started doing what the University of Bedfordshire is calling for in terms of explaining the changing face of exploitation in this area.
Thanks. Is that research that will be published, or?
Yes, I think.
Yeah. So do you know when that will be? I don't
No,
think it's...
but I can.
Okay. So could we be sent the research?
Yeah.
As well to any of the additional information about the work?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just quickly go back on something that Assembly Member said around the disproportionality panel? If we are aware, or the police are aware, that gangs are coming in, let's say from somewhere called Never Never Land, because I'm hoping that doesn't exist. So you've got a whole load of gangs coming in from a place, and I'm not naming anywhere because that would be silly. So from a place, and they were renowned for going into gangs, burgling or something, then that would have to be taken into consideration with that board. Exactly what my colleague here is saying. That we've got to be very careful sometimes. Balance is always looked for, but sometimes there's reasons people are on these lists. And it could be that there's been loads and loads of burglaries from people from Never Never Land, and therefore that's got to be factored into if you're looking for disproportionality. And I think that's more or less what you were saying as well, isn't it? Do you see what I mean? I'm not going to mention a real place because I'm not referring to a specific place. What I'm saying to you, sometimes people say, oh, this matrix or this or whatever, this list isn't fair because it's disproportionate. As my colleague absolutely pointed out, sometimes it is proportionate because that's where the area that you're finding that particular criminal element is. So therefore, the lists are going to be skewed for that reason.
Yes, I think I understand, but I think there's going to have to be a lot of contextualisation around the reasons for that, and that's why it's important to have a board with expertise around that, because your response has to be in relation to that. So, for example, why is there a high rate of people coming from Never Never Land here? And, what are we doing in other spaces that, are they NRPF? Are we doing enough in that area? Are they feeling like they're being exploited for? There's a lot of contextual reasons, and it's important that, as I said, having crime data and statistics is an opportunity for us to analyse that, look at the causes, the complex causes of crime, and react effectively.
We absolutely get that. But if we look at the population, and there was 1% of people from Never Never Land, and that on this list they were represented by 10% of the names or whatever, there would be a reason for that. So my point, and I'm not making it as well as my colleague, but my point being, sometimes we have to look at lists and they're not proportionate to the population, but they're proportionate to the crimes being committed. I'll leave it at that, but I do hope you understand, because this comes up time and time again, and you look at sometimes when people are on lists, they're there because they need to be there, and it may be disproportionate, but they're there and it's the right thing. I think my colleague wants to come in. Try and put it better than me, Len.
I can't, because I think it needs an entire meeting about disproportionality. But I would say this on disproportionality is, I think, one of the issues of the direction of travel that we've taken on this area is we're much better getting away from the gangs matrix, which was based, which was distorted because it had opinion and some evidence and everything else. And this violent harm assessment appears to be evidence-based. But the problem, it seems to me, that it's there, and I don't think we're getting the full picture of gangs, because there are gangs and gangs, and at different levels. And I think there's also a danger of criminalising our young people, which is not true, because most of them are not in gangs and everything else. I presume the violent harm assessment, the real problem that I'm worried about, and I have in my head, and maybe I need to be reassured when we come back and revisit this, is that the mixture between protecting us and protecting the community from the most violent to diversions, right? We need to understand that some of the individuals on this index that you're monitoring are very dangerous individuals. They would have only arrived there because they've committed more than one crime that's violent. Now, pathways out, I think, are important, and I would be the first to say a public health approach to this, but sometimes you could be wasting a lot of time and effort here, because sadly we've missed the boat on that, of trying to divert some of these individuals. Now, of course, we live in hope, but I'm just trying to understand this, because I did some work with this committee in a previous administrations around tackling the most 500 individuals on domestic violence and targeting them, and to be on that list you had to commit offences against in 3 different boroughs. The top 500 domestic violence had been travelling around in their relationships and had committed those, and we needed protecting by. So I presume this is also about targeting strategies to protect and keep us safe from some of these individuals, not just in terms of pathways out. And in that, I'm just wondering, can we have some more information about how you've arrived on the list then? Because if I'm correct in terms of the information we've got, I'd be more interested about that. I would like to see, do never want to see work of pathways out of criminality stopped, but it just means that I don't think our police officers are focused initially on that. That's got to be someone else's job to do, isn't it, in terms of some of the public health. When this comes back to us, and maybe if we have an exchange of communication, because I think it's worth following up, because I think targeting and prioritising is going to be key to tackling and driving down some of these crime stats that are contained in this section of the report. If we could see where the public health approach fits into it, who's doing that, who's actually leading that, and who's actually tackling and protecting us from the most dangerous and violent criminals, or gang criminals, if I can call it that. And can we also check whether, so gangs that I'm thinking of are a different order in the pecking order. Is this the complete picture or a partial picture of our gang activity in terms of serious crime? Because this age group that we've got, I think there's one disproportionately, there are gang members who are much older. They're much older. We hear that once we see them going through the court cases. We see a number of young people below 24, and there's usually someone of 45 or in their 40s running alongside them and everything else. And in terms of some of the criminal networks, some of their activities they're involved in is slightly different. So, you know, gangs involved in prostitution, gangs involved in, you know, in terms of sex trafficking, in terms of the drugs issues.
Yeah.
It's not just territorial issues and young people that want to shoot videos and be there. That may be a pathway onto that. There's a different type of issue. So when we come back on this, it's more about, can we just think a little bit more about some of the information we're asking of the MPS, and then maybe we could ask MPS officer to accompany with you on it and see if we can blend the public health approach to the issue around how to harder protection and targeting of the most violent.
Yep. Okay. Did you want to?
I mean, I think Assembly Member Duval is obviously, from his expertise, very, you know, it's very important that we look at all areas of modern slavery, exploitation, and there's, you know, a lot of interconnectivity, and it's an ecosystem, isn't it? And you're right to ask for that information. But I wanted to be clear that the investment through the Violence and Exploitation Support Service is rightly where you say in the public health side approach. So we're working with organisations including Safer London, St Giles Trust, New Horizons Youth Centre, Anna Freud and MOPAC in that public health prevention space. You know, we all know that the police is the right, and the criminal justice system, moreover, is a completely right space to deal with those serious, you know, offenders, and you know, the you know, whether that be prisons, secure units, there is a whole infrastructure around that. This is in the public health prevention space. But also I do think, you know, you're right about perpetrators, and that's why we need to do perpetrator work. There has to be, you know, we've talked a lot about today about balance. There has to be balance in both things. We can't accept at any point that it's just you get to a point and you're lost. I mean, you know, I think probation do a hell of a lot of brilliant work in this space as well, and need to continue to do that. So I think it is taking a whole system approach to it.
Yeah. And actually in the next meeting we've got LibPAC and MOPAC coming. We can talk to them about commissioning and make sure that that's in with the questioning. Thank you for that. We're now moving on to our last section, and it is regarding shoplifting and assaults on shop workers, which is a massive problem at the moment, and that's going to be led by my colleague, Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. So, Kaya, again, the questions I'm going to ask you, you'd have benefited from the police being here, because to be very frank, I was going to ask, you know, more questions of them in terms of how they respond to the shocking statistics around attacks on shop workers. In terms of stats, in February 2024, the British Retail Consortium showed us the figures were some 1,300 incidents recorded per day. So I think the stats speak for themselves, absolutely sort of shocking. So my first question, Kaya, is how are MOPAC and the Met working together to tackle the increase in shoplifting and violence or abuse against shop workers?
Thank you very much. So MOPAC officers are regularly meeting with the business community, including the Safer Business Network, to better understand the challenges that businesses are facing related to retail crime. MOPAC has also instigated meetings specifically with business improvement districts and the wider business community. And I think that that's really important. I know when I was in my previous role, that I was a representative for not a business improvement district, but a town centre. And one of the significant things that we did through our convening powers in that area is get together local retailers, especially supermarket chains, to talk about the high volume crime that was happening in those areas and what retailers could do to support the police in making sure that reporting was happening. So whether that being having good CCTV, regular reporting, you know, I understand fully why, and it goes to your point about protecting retail staff, why a lot of supermarkets have a don't tackle policy, but actually they need to follow that up with reporting so that the police are fully furnished with the information on the volume of crimes. So I think it's taking a very collaborative community safety approach, and that's something that me and you saw in Stratford, working with the Met to have initiatives, and MOPAC and the MPS chair jointly the Retail Harm Reduction Partnership. So that's another illustration where quarterly leading retailers look to identify trends, issues, and offer mitigations using their own insights and share best practice. And, you know, I think that that's a really important strategic approach, but some of the things that we saw together around officers setting up their own initiatives like Adopt a Shop, where they have those important relationships with retailers to make sure that they're working together to do that, are important too.
Okay, I mean, that's the police were here. I could have asked them questions about how they actually respond in practice to a lot of these sort of reported cases. And this is where I think the £200 rule comes in. Well, it's not a rule, but so my understanding of the £200 limit is this, because there is a belief in many quarters that any shoplifting under the sum of £200, the police would not act, would not respond. And as I understand it, that's not the case. The £200 rule basically is, as I understand it, that people charged with shoplifting items valued under £200 would not need to attend court, but be dealt with by postal summonses. And this somehow sort of gave a misleading impression that it wasn't a crime sort of worth investigating or responding to. I understand that the government is actually in the process of reviewing this particular £200 limit. It's part of the review of the ASP Crime and Policing Act, and the mayor has told us, this was on, I think, earlier this month, that he would support the review of this £200 limit. So, if my understanding is correct, that the police, can prosecute regardless of the amount of the value of the shoplifting, but if this limit is lifted, so that depending on circumstances, the case can be actually dealt with by the offender actually attending court. How would that help MOPAC and the Met in holding shoplifters accountable for their actions?
Yes, I mean, I think it's really important in the area of high volume crimes like shoplifting and stealing, moreover, that there is swift justice, and the criminal justice system supports that. And I'm glad that that is being looked at, because it obviously provides a deterrent, doesn't it, to these actions, and also I think gives the people who report it a lot of confidence, because I'm sure we've all heard incidences of people saying, oh, I don't report because there's a perception that if I report, nothing happens, or someone, they're taken away by the police, and then that person is perceived to be back at that activity going on. So it is a key area that we need to see improvement, because it's not only deterrent but reassurance for the community that it is a priority. And I know how this sense of not having safety when you're witnessing that kind of crime, and also the shoplifters feeling constantly in their workplace, having that, having to be witnesses of crime in the workplace a lot is obviously distressing.
Yeah, I think it's also a question of how seriously the offence is pursued, because dealing with something through the post gives the impression it's like a speeding fine, that you can just sort of tick the box and just pay the fine. But so moving on, what support does MOPAC provide to victims of retail crime, and particularly to shop workers who experience violence and abuse? The Assembly has got a very clear position on this. I brought a motion last year that was supported by all the political groups bar one who abstained. Attacks on shop workers, no matter what the circumstances are, just simply cannot be tolerated. And I think in the context of this question in particular, it's more the organized gangs now that you see some frightening images on television. It's a national issue where, sort of gangs just storm a shop. The staff are absolutely petrified. Actually, no shop workers had this experience and target basically cigarettes and alcoholic drinks. So what support does MOPAC provide to victims of crime, but as I said, particularly shop workers who experience violence and abuse?
Yes, I mean, I completely agree with you, Assembly Member Desai, that it is really shocking, and USDAW has done a recent report and says that a fifth of retail staff have suffered a violent attack in the last year. So, we are talking about significant harmful issues for retail workers, which, no one should feel like that in their place of work. And I fully support our focus on this area and the improvements needed. And also, it's great to hear the new government are thinking about creating a specific offence for assault on shop workers that will protect them from threats and violence, and make it clear to criminals that they cannot act like that without impunity. I think that is a significant step given what you've said. What the Met are already doing, which is important, is providing details of their victim contact desk on email for retailers, so investigations can be reported, but also that those people who have done that get regular updates on their investigation, and that's something that's come out of that partnership work.
Okay. So you answered my next question, which was about the government's intention to bring in a specific offence, which I think is the ask of this assembly as well, of making attacks on shop workers a specific offence in its own right. So we also got the cooperative movement, the Cooperative Party, and the GMB Trade Union, along with USDAW and the British Rail Consortium. They all support this measure, as I understand it. So
I think that shows the importance of this committee, doesn't
indeed.
it?
Two more questions. In terms of the Met's Operation Retail, how does MOPAC monitor the effectiveness of the operation in responding to shoplifting offences and building trust with businesses? Are there any measures in terms of...
Yes, so MOPAC established a robbery reduction partnership, and that's the partnership that looks at the KPIs around this area, and it's MOPAC, but it's also the CPS, London Council's Youth Offending Service, Transport for London, the Safer Business Network, and the Violence Reduction Unit. So they make sure that they are analysing robbery performance, hotspot policing, and importantly, given our last topic, the Swift Justice pilots that have been put in place, and also an issue that I'm sure you've all been aware of. They are looking at the government's work in preparation for smartphone robbery as well. So it's a really key partnership board that really does monitor and make sure that it's using its live insights to improve things for London, but also nationally.
Okay. My final question, again, with regards to the work of the Robbery Reduction Partnership, how is this work being evaluated, and what measures or outcomes are in place to analyse the impact of this work?
So MOPAC is on the board and obviously continues to evaluate the work of the board as well as sitting on it. But it's already had the positive outcomes of sharing good practice, especially in particular areas, and problem solving. Some of the things that I mentioned before have been key areas that have come out of this work.
Okay, I mean, if you can get back to us in due course, maybe writing about sort of more practical initiatives or robust performance management, sort of indicators about how the partnership is progressing. And I think one area where the Mayor and MOPAC, could do something effective is actually mounting sort of a London-wide publicity campaign. I mean, there is public awareness, but I think some sort of regular campaigning to the various sort of outlets of the GLA family, well, Mopac in particular, but advertising and so on. You know, it's a national issue. It's not just a London issue, it's a national issue, and it's not going to go away.
No, it definitely is a national issue, and it's something that, you know, I've already had one roundtable on robbery with the Home Office and my equivalents across the country and the mayors of their cities too. So it's definitely on the national agenda. I'd be really interested, Councillor, Assembly Member Desai, I only did it once this time, that's good, progress, to talk to you about your ideas around that campaign and what that would look like. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'll finish on this note, Chair, that I've spoken to staff who work for major sort of stores like Sainsbury's. I mean, they have a problem, but I'm particularly concerned about the very small shops who don't have the security of the staff, one person or a family outfit, it's often in isolated parts of the community. But yeah, I will liaise with you. And finally, in terms of the police non-attendance meeting, can I just say, I think Len's leaving the chamber, but what Len did once say that told the Met that, you know, we regard us as critical friends. And I think that aspect is not just about police performance this committee is concerned about. We talk about police pay, police mental health of officers, their welfare. And I echo what Assemblymember Best said. I don't think that Baroness Casey saw the policing board or the police advisory board, as some of us call it, as an alternative to this committee. I can confidently say this, that I'm sure she saw it as a compliment. And we have different roles to perform. And as I said, this last section in particular today, well, all the sections, but it will have benefited from the police being here, because a lot of the operational practices or what happens, you know, I think they can answer it much more confidently, based on the experiences. Sorry, not confidently, but more precisely than you are able to. You can talk us about the various MOPAC stuff, bodies and so on, and performance measurement and all that, but that sort of day-to-day experience, I think only a serving senior police officer can bring to this chamber. I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. There's still another question on this section. Do you want to take it? Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. Just on some of these offences, something I find quite frustrating is a lot of them seem to be being treated as shoplifting when they're burglary or aggravated burglary. And I think that's also now a common misconception in the reporting of the crime, is sometimes people will report that there's been a shoplifter when actually there's been somebody that's assaulted staff and climbed behind a counter and taken all the drink and cigarettes. That's aggravated burglary. And is there a way in which we can make sure that we are targeting people for the crime they have committed as opposed to the lesser offence of shoplifting?
Yes, Assembly Member Bessa, and I wonder if that's partly what the campaign could be about, because obviously, you know, we need to make sure that our retail partners are fully in their reporting, making sure that they're giving all of the information and you know, evidence that they have to make sure that the appropriate investigations are happening and appropriate charges are given, because you're absolutely right, where it's serious assault or burglary, it needs to be treated as such. And we should make sure as well that we're talking, I'll go back and make sure that MOPAC is making sure that through its oversight on the Retail Partnership Board, is it asking the right questions of the police around what they are asking? Because obviously we see the statistics, which is based on the offences, so we need to make sure that the offences are rightly categorised from the beginning.
Thank you. And on that, I mean, I can't help but go back to my personal experience of this, which is in the high street where I live, where I'm also a councillor near the area. Like, the shopkeepers have created a matrix of known shoplifters. I'm there all the time with other councillors and business owners, and we call the police straight away when they're in there stealing, and there's just no interest. There's absolutely no interest in tackling shoplifting. There's absolutely no interest in following up on CCTV. There's the known images. Sometimes we know their full names, and get to the point of talking to them on a kind of can you just get lost today kind of level, and they have a laugh of us because they know that's where we are, and the police literally don't seem to care or seem to want to be involved. And I think that is an experience that those that are involved on high streets across London are experiencing, and it would really be good to have the focus or feel like the shopkeepers want to feel supported by the police, and they absolutely don't at the moment. So I think that's more something to take away than anything else. And then my only other comment is just on some of these more extreme cases where people are going in and pushing everything off the rack into bags. The Met's done really well with social media recently with following up on phone thefts. Some of these, crimes that are really topical and people are concerned about. Can they follow up with some more social media videos, perhaps on where convictions have been brought against people that have done some of those viral clearing of the shops? Yeah. If hopefully there has been any convictions.
I think that your last point there is, something I heard from colleagues with great passion a video that they had watched about the police arresting someone on the basis of a phone theft. So it's clearly impactful where they do that. So perhaps, as Assembly Member Desai suggested, as part of a public campaign, we look at how we can do that, because it is obviously important. On your previous comment, I don't think it's that they don't care. I don't think that any public servant doesn't care, and the local police, I know, do care deeply about their patch and their areas they serve. I think what is really hopeful in this space is, the Mayor, the Home Secretary and others, and the Commissioner being really strident and prioritising neighbourhood policing, and, through the recruitment of PCSOs, which I know the Mayor has put money in, and, the Home Secretary was talking about the importance of neighbourhood policing yesterday. I think we can get a real galvanising around community safety, and we all know, and it's an issue that's coming across London. I spoke to London MPs the other night. It came up time and time again, so it's clearly something that needs to be really tackled, and so that retailers do feel assured in reporting, and effective policing that will be followed up. So I just want to, put on record my commitment to making sure in the new policing crime plan that high volume crime will be, and neighbourhood policing will be intrinsic in that.
Thanks. And I should clarify, obviously there is a level of care, but obviously officers will feel like they're acting on the priorities of their senior management. If they feel that that's not a crime that they should be spending their hours pursuing, then that's, I think, where the disconnect is.
And I think we're almost violently agreeing that prioritisation needs to be given greater strength.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garrett.
One further takeaway, if I may, is that quite often we find that there is a reluctance on the part of major retailers to take the issue of shoplifting seriously. It's almost as a write-off. And whilst we, as boroughs, individual boroughs, can address this potentially through matters relating to licensing, I wonder if there's a piece of work, if it hasn't yet already been undertaken, for the Office of the Deputy Mayor to use its convening powers of major retailers to bring them together, to say that, to give very clear guidance, very clear understanding of what London is expecting from them in their part against fighting shoplifting, because, as I say, too often it's seen as a rather difficult sign, having security guards at the door and stuff like that. But if we are going to take this seriously, then they need to be playing their part, and I think this is something which the Assembly as a whole, but certainly the Office of Deputy Mayor, could lead on.
I mean, I feel strongly about this area, as I said, from my own experience, and it's something that I've actually talked to the Deputy Mayor for Business about, Howard Darber, and I know that, you know, he's also came back to me with concerns from major retailers about, you know, the things that Assemblyman Desai so passionately outlaid. So it is an area, and I do think we already have the retail partnership, safety partnership, and I'll make sure that you know, passing on communications about what would be really effective for those major retailers to do in this space is really important. I think given their high volume across London, they have certain responsibilities that we need to make sure that they are enacting.
Thank you. Thank you. I would just briefly say that I think the comments from my colleagues calling it shoplifting sometimes makes it look like it's a little offence. It is not little. It is very, very bad. It terrorises people that work in the shops and the customers. And if retailers turn a blind eye because they're not getting response from the police, it will get worse and worse, because these perpetrators know they can just go in there if they want a bottle of wine or whatever else. They'll just take it and nobody will do anything. And I think unless there's some strong discouragement, if I can put it that way, unless that happens, we're going to see it escalating and escalating. And as my colleague said, it's not just a case of shoplifting, it's getting more and more violence with it, and they're getting more and more brazen. So we'd love to see something happening in that space, as you would say. Anyway, thank you very much indeed, Deputy Mayor, for attending this morning and for your answers to our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can I ask the committee to note the monthly report from MOPAC? Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman, in consultation with party group lead members, to agree any output arising from the meeting? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme? Thank you. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on Wednesday, the 4th of December at 10 a.m. in committee rooms 2 and 3, City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.